Welcome back to your nightmares, my children. This is Mr. Midnight speaking. I welcome you all to my humble abode. Today, we will be looking at the brothers or sisters of the Skinwalker, the Wendigos. I have two terrifying tales for you. Let's get into this. And always remember, the darkness always follows. I will now leave you with my narrator. So enjoy.
The Wendigo. I'm writing everything down in this journal to document our journey to Fort Kent and the subsequent events that transpired afterward. I hope that whoever finds this journal will publicize what had happened in this town to us between the dates of January 12th to February 13, 2018. Do you know of the Fort Kent Wendigo in Alberta, Canada? Most would say it is an urban legend, but after what I have read and experienced, my view has taken 180-degree turn. It all started when myself and a group of 3 friends wanted to make a Bollywood movie about the Wendigo. After spending 2 weeks of researching the Wendigo and what they look like, I found the Wendigo of Fort Kent. Some say that a doctor locked himself in his house with his dead wife that had just died of smallpox. Then he ate her and turned into the Wendigo. Along with his wife, many of the townsfolk died from smallpox. Once the man left his home, he killed and ate the remaining dozen or so residents of the town. No one is really sure about what happened. But there is one fact no one can deny. Fort Kent became a ghost town, and no one really knows why. After finding out all of this information, I knew that we had a great idea for a movie. The only problem was the place was pretty isolated. So if we got into any trouble, it would be days before anyone would be able to help them. Luckily, Bobby's parents were filthy rich, since they were both plastic surgeons. They spoiled Bobby rotten and gave him everything he wanted. Even so, he was a pretty down-to-earth guy and one of my best friends. Along with Bobby, there was Mike and Kyle. As for myself, the producer of the soon-to-be movie, my name is Tara. So we took off in a small jet, heading from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada to Elk Point Airport, Alberta. We took a fancy Canon 80D DSLR camera with us to shoot the movie, as well as a portable film mixer, a wireless microphone system, a shotgun microphone and boom pole, wind protection for the mics, a field recorder, and headphones. Along with all that equipment, we brought camping equipment. When we got to Elk Point Airport, we rented a Hyundai Tucson, loaded it with all of our equipment, and headed for Bonnyville. Now, it usually takes 45 minutes to an hour to drive to Bonnyville, but we were going in January. They had just gotten 24 centimeters of snow, and the roads were heavy with snow. It took us 3 hours to get to Bonnyville, where we got groceries and lots of alcohol for our month stay in the ghost town of Fort Kent. For a bit of background, the 4 of us have been friends since elementary and just graduated high school. We decided to take a year off before heading to college, and came up with the bright idea of making a horror movie. Bobby's parents had given Bobby the sound equipment and camera as a graduation present. We spent the summer figuring out what we were going to film when we came across the urban legend of the Wendigo of Fort Kent. Since then, we have been obsessed about the film. After we had gotten the essentials needed for our trip to the ghost town, we headed for the fort. January 12th, 2018, Day 1. We arrived in Fort Kent around 2 p.m. It took us 4 hours to set up all the tents and gear. We decided to set up near the outskirts of town. For some reason, we felt more comfortable here. No one said anything, but everyone got more nervous the further we went into town. By the time we were all set up, the sun had already set, and we couldn't see anything past the glow of the bonfire. We decided to drink the night away, talking about all the things we would do once the morning came. Around 10 p.m., we started to notice snowflakes starting to fall. We huddled around the fire more, but when the wind started picking up as well, we decided to call it a night. We had two tents set up, one for me and Mike, and the other one for Kyle and Bobby. Mike and I lay on top of a blow-up queen-size mattress that had three heavy covers on top of it. The two of us got under the blankets and looked up at the ceiling. I could feel Mike trying to get into my pants, but I shrugged him off. This place was giving me a bad vibe, and I wasn't in the mood. The walls of the 8-person tent shook as the wind and snow pummeled against the tent, making it difficult to hear anything. At the time, I didn't think anything of it, but I swore I thought I could hear the howl of a wolf through the sound of the wind. January 13, 2018, Day 2. I woke up around 6 a.m. this morning to Mike snoring beside me. His arm was draped around me as my eyes slowly opened. The tent was still and the sound of the wind was silent. I brought my hand up to his arm and pulled it off me. I rolled off the bed and pulled myself off the floor. I quickly got dressed. To my surprise, it was warmer inside than I thought it would have been. I put on a parka and touquet and opened the flap that led outside. A foot of snow fell into the tent the moment the flap was open. I let out a startled silent meep and jumped back. I looked behind me, wondering if I had awoken Mike. To my relief, he was still snoring away. I composed myself and pulled myself out of the tent and into the snow. The snow crunched under my boots as I walked outside. I stood at 5 foot 8 inches and had the snow reach up to my knees. So overnight we had gotten a fair amount of snow. So it took me by complete surprise when I saw a set of footprints traveling through the snow around our tents. I figured that Bowie must have gotten up during the night and had a smoke. So again, I didn't think much of it. I looked towards the town. 2 run-down houses stood about 100 feet away. Then I looked to my right and saw a rental vehicle completely covered in snow. I spent the next 2 hours cleaning up the vehicle of snow. By the time I had finally gotten it cleaned, the rest of my friends had gotten up and started walking around. Bobby had taken out his camera and started to film the area. The last I had seen him, was him heading into town with Kyle, while Mike came over to me. We talked a while about the project we were working on. We didn't have any shovels, so getting the SUV out of the area we were in was very difficult. Eventually, after much effort, we got the SUV out and onto the soft snow. The 4-wheel drive made the situation a little better. We both got into the SUV and drove it through the town. We followed the footprints that seemed to go to each house in the town until finally the footprints went to a house and there weren't any footprints coming back out. We parked the SUV on the side of the road, got out and headed to the house. The footprints went too. Turns out the house had looked like someone had been living in it recently. We found them in the basement. Bobby was filming, writing, which was covering every square inch of the basement. On one side of the wall it read, "Beware the Wendigo." As the writing went along the wall, the writing got more and more messy. By the end, the writing became scratches in the wall. Finally it read, "I am the Wendigo." We did some more shooting, making an introduction to the movie. By the time 4 p.m. came around, we decided to head back to the campground and pack it in for the night. By the time we got back to camp, it was pitch black outside. We parked the SUV beside the tents and all four of us headed inside, mine and Mike's tent. We continued to drink and had a cold dinner from soup cans. We played cards until 10 p.m., right until we heard a howl coming right outside of our tent. We had been talking very loudly, so we hadn't heard it approach. We could hear that sound of crunching snore under heavy footprints. Then its shadow cast itself on the tent, and the only thing we could see were its legs. Not only was the creature bipedal, but it was huge. Mike was about to open the flap to check what it was when we heard the sound of metal being torn to pieces, the sound of a car alarm going off as it did. I wanted to scream, but I was too terrified to do so. Soon the sound of metal being torn to shreds stopped and silence ensued. I was about to let out a sigh of relief when I heard another howl. Then the sound of the other tent being torn to shreds could be heard. After another 5 minutes the sound faded and we could hear the creature walking away from our tents. We waited until midnight to get out of our tent and see the damage. The car and tent were destroyed. We had left most of our food in the car, and from what we could see, there was no food left. Kyle started to cry and Bobby tried to console her, while Mike and I just stood there in shock, wondering what we would do next. Bobby had brought his camera into our tent, but the sound equipment he had been in his tent and was now destroyed as well. We realized that our project was finished and we'd have to go back to Bonneville in the morning. We didn't get much sleep that night, and this was only the tip of the iceberg. Our stay in Fort Kent was only just starting. And after this, there was no update. So what could have happened to our little friends in this case? Was it a Wendigo? What was it? We will never know. This is how you kill a Wendigo. My twin sister, Janessa, was murdered at age 16. I witnessed it like a coward from atop a tree in the forest where it happened. I'd actually blacked out the memory for a while. I knew she was dead, but I couldn't remember how it happened. It wasn't until I tried therapy that it slowly came back to me. I was also reminded of how much my parents used to fight. Our family was planning on a camping trip the day before my sister's death. Before leaving, my parents erupted into another massive fight. Janessa and I had been looking forward to the trip, and once again, our parents' awful communication skills was ruining it before it even began. We snuck out of the house and took a lift to the forest. We left our phones at home, not caring whether our parents would be worried sick. We enjoyed ourselves the first day. I set up our tent, made a fire, had s'mores, and all the stuff one typically associated with camping. The next morning, everything changed. I woke up alone in our tent. Outside, I hear my sister talking to someone. Inquisitive, I opened the tent and saw someone sitting at our now out campfire who looked just like me. The figure transformed as soon as Janessa realized it wasn't me. Together we ran off, that thing rushing after us with heavy steps. I was faster than my sister and a bit more athletic. I grabbed onto a tree branch and climbed up a tree. Janessa was not so lucky. I watched it happen. I watched that thing tear my sister to pieces. I am still haunted by her screams. I also understand now why she always appears badly mutilated in my nightmares. I stayed up in that tree overnight, my sister's corpse lying in the leaves, her remaining eye always staring up at me. While in therapy, there was a moment when I suddenly recalled the hallucination I had the morning after my sister's death. I thought I saw her corpse clawing at the tree where I hid. She wanted me to come down and join her. It caused me to panic and cry out. A couple of men who had been camping in the area heard my screams, and at last I was rescued. My parents don't argue anymore. I hardly see them at all anymore since my sister's death. We're an upper middle class family. Over the last couple of years, my parents have frequently gone on vacations. They don't tell me where, and I never ask. I usually just wake up and find out they've left yet again. I'm out of high school now, and I have no career path yet. I've only really had one thing on my mind since I remembered what killed Janessa. Now I'm returning to the forest where she died. Now I'm going to go after the thing that killed her. I have been preparing for this. And if it is a Wendigo like I've suspected, then I am more than ready to take my revenge. This is how I'm doing it. I took a lift again. Had the driver known what I was carrying in my bags, I doubt they would have let me in. As I sat there, the realization of what I was doing grew heavily on me. What the hell am I doing? I've been talking myself up for the last couple of years. As much as I want a glorious victory, the closer I've come to this day, the more I daydream about dying the same way Janessa did. As angry as I am with my parents, I don't think they deserve to lose their only remaining child. But I just can't move on, knowing that thing is still out there. My legs were as dense as gold once I tried to exit the cab. The driver watched awkwardly as I struggled to pull myself out while putting on my backpack and working to carry the other supplies. Why was I doing this alone? I don't want anyone else getting hurt in this, I think was my reasoning. But God, I wish I wasn't out here doing this alone. With each step I took into the forest, the more the terror numbed. I was in the domain of the Wendigo now. I wasn't entirely sure how much of the information about them was real. I knew they could change their appearance. I know that their true form is just like the drawings people have made. There's no way to be an expert on these things unless you've actually dealt with one. I am still not sure why it decided not to come after me. Based on its size, I doubt it would have had any difficulty. Instead, I'm still alive and crazy enough to come back and pick a fight. As I set up camp, I found myself jumping at the sound of any bird call or movement from a nearby animal. The way I hammered in my tent, I knew I was calling attention to myself. In my left pants pocket was a gun. Like werewolves, I had heard that silver bullets were necessary to kill Wendigos. What if I'm wrong? The thought that had been with me ever since I'd stepped foot back into these woods. I stopped frequently while setting up. Behind a nearby tree, I was almost certain I could see someone watching me, and then hiding behind it again. I didn't bother to walk over and check it out. I finished up my tent and made up my sleeping bag inside. As I did this, I heard calls that sounded almost human off in the distance. It probably knew I was here. The minutes went by slowly, but soon dusk set upon the forest. I built a fire like the one Janessa and I had made. I roasted 2 marshmallows. Despite her absence, I made a s'more for her as well, resting it on a sizable rock near the fire. As I ate it, I thought about our last night together. All things considered, it was pleasant. Being twins, we had moments where we'd gotten into arguments like our parents. We'd fought one another. We had our problems, but that night had been pleasant. I'd actually been glad we decided to camp without our parents. As frightened as I still was, I felt a warmth, not from the fire. A sense of calm overcame me as my memories were suddenly flooded with the good times Janessa and I had. The good times were not for long. I could hear footsteps not far behind me. Jeremy. I could never forget that voice. It sounded just like Janessa, but I knew it wasn't her. For some reason, I felt compelled to sit there calmly. As they approached, I could tell they was going over to take a seat at the rock where I left the s'more. I glanced delicately to my right. I watched as a figure that looked almost identical to Janessa. I remembered pick up the small and take a bite. That's not yours, I surprised myself blurting that out. The fake Janessa ignored me, continuing to scarf it down. My terror turned to anger. The thing responsible for my sister's death was standing right next to me, mocking my grief. I didn't wait for it to finish. I pulled out my gun and pointed it directly at the figure. Before I could fire, the creature jumped to the left and turned around. I was struck with paralysis when I saw the mutilated face of my sister's corpse staring back at me. I'm trapped, Jeremy. I struggled to keep aim. How dare that thing pretend to be her? It won't let me go, and it won't let you go either. We can be together again. It's so much nicer than going home to an empty house and unloving parents. She held her hand out to me. Trust me, brother, please. My trigger finger felt as though struck with a serious case of arthritis. Janessa took a step towards me. Wait, no, it's not Janessa. Why did I suddenly forget that? Feed the forest with me, Jeremy. It's so much better being dead. Prove it. At last I pulled the trigger. The creature hollowed in pain as it fell to the ground. I'd hit a lung, which wouldn't be enough, and I aimed the gun at its heart, but failed to pull the trigger as it rolled over and jumped back to its feet. Within seconds, it transformed from a corpse of my sister to its massive dog skeletal form with massive antlers. My mind was caught between fight and flight. I stood there aiming my gun, but desperately wanting to flee. As it rushed towards me, I chose the later option. I rushed over to the bag I'd left near the tent. Inside was a weapon I'd built myself. As I rushed over, I could tell I wasn't going to be able to outrun it. I fired another shot. The bullet lodged itself inside the neck of the beast. It cried out once more, buying me a bit of time to get to the bag. Why did I have it zipped up? As I tried to open it, the Wendigo rushed towards me again. Just like on the day of Janessa's death, I ran from the campsite further into the forest. History was repeating itself. I was going to fail to avenge my sister. My parents were going to lose their last remaining child. All because I couldn't let this go. After at least several minutes, I had somehow managed to keep outrunning it. I refused to slow down and look behind my shoulder. As I kept running, I noticed that I'd gone in some sort of circle. Up ahead of me was the campsite. I had a chance to grab the bag and pulled out the weapon. The closer I came to the campsite, the louder the Wendigo's footsteps became. I could almost feel the wind as the creature tried to claw at me. Once I reached the campsite, I put my hand out, clutching the bag. It felt like almost too great a risk to put my gun back in my pocket, but I needed it free to pull out the weapon. I managed to do just that and used my left hand to pull out a long metal spike. I had built it in such a way as to have the spike shoot out at the push of a button. The Wendigo wasn't going to slow down until it had me. I had no choice. I had to turn around. I had to have perfect timing. I had to collect my debt from the creature that took my twin sister. Chew on this, you son of a... I turned around, pressing the button that shot the spike out. Less than a foot from my face was the Wendigo. Its cry so loud my ears hurt and began to ring. I'd done it. The spike had pierced the heart. Silver, weakly, the Wendigo tried to swipe at me, but somehow lacked the strength. The next part was a gamble. I pulled out my gun and shot it in the head. It wasn't going to be enough to end the Wendigo, assuming what I'd read up was correct. I rushed back over to where I dropped my bag. Inside was a silver axe I'd also designed myself. When I returned, the creature was still conscious, letting out continuous, agonizing cries. I felt no sympathy. I hacked away at its wrists first. Its claws were the biggest threat, and I wanted them gone. Despite the weight lifting I'd been doing, it took over a dozen hacks to remove the first long-fingered hand. I pulled out my gun and shot it again in the head. It subdued the creature long enough for me to remove the second hand, and then I began on its head. As I began waking up again, I found myself screaming at the creature. I demanded it stay dead, calling it every insulting name that came to mind. Once I'd hacked most of the way away, though its head I pulled it off. I kicked it a couple of feet away. The Wendigo no longer moved. It took over an hour, but I'd managed to put each limb, the head and torso, in the trash bags I had brought along. One by one, I carried them back to the campsite. I lit another fire, burning each bag. It took until dawn for me to burn the body. I left the torso for last. It was a struggle, but I managed to remove the heart, rip it to pieces, and place it in a silver box. After locking it, I looked around the site and decided to leave everything except my gun and the box behind. I was never particularly religious, but in the months leading up to my fight, I'd gotten to know a priest at a church in my area called St. Alphonsus. Luckily for me, he was there when I arrived with the silver box. His face went several shades paler when I showed it to him. Nevertheless, he escorted me to the back of the church with a pair of shovels and helped me bury it. Once done, I sat there, suddenly flooded with overwhelming emotions. I did it. The Wendigo had been slain. I'd done it. My sister's killer was dead. Its body was burned, its heart in pieces and buried. Janessa, I cried out. I kept my promise. I killed it. The Wendigo can't get anyone else. It won't kill anyone else. I placed my lowered head in my hands and continued to cry. I'm sorry I wasn't braver before, I whimpered. I'm so sorry I wasn't stronger before. I placed some flowers on my sister's grave an hour later. I talked to her tombstone as though she was there listening. I'd like to believe she was, and that she was pleased with my accomplishment. Afterwards, I returned home and slept through the day and all night. Once morning came, I heard some noise downstairs. I went down to see that my parents were home and sitting down to breakfast. They stopped and looked over at me, saying nothing. I walked over and pulled up a seat. I had no appetite at all. How was your trip? Where did you guys go? My parents exchanged looks before my father replied, We went out west to visit your aunt and uncle. Did you enjoy it? I had difficulty keeping my chin from quivering as I lowered my head again. Jeremy, sweetie, what's wrong? Both my mother and my father got up and came over to me. Why do you keep leaving me alone, goddammit? I'm the only kid you have left. Don't you give a F about me? They hugged me tightly, offering apologies. I could have sworn I felt another pair of hands on my shoulders. Their light touch was the most comforting of all. I really hope Janessa is proud of me. But a new task was ahead of me now, a harder task perhaps. I was going to have to figure out how to reconcile with my parents. Our family had been broken long before her death. We'll never be whole again. But I know with some effort we can be better than this. I hope she can continue to give me the strength to put myself together as I progress into adulthood.
Well, my children, I thank you all for listening. I hope these two stories scared you and terrified you and filled you with fear. I'll see you again very soon. So until then, love the darkness as it always and always will forever follow.